I hadn't set foot in Ironwood in nearly a decade, yet when the bus rattled to a stop beside the old depot, it felt like time had been frozen in place. The windows of the diner were still fogged with steam, the same crooked church steeple pierced the horizon, and the bent "Welcome to Ironwood" sign leaned stubbornly in the same direction it had when I was a teenager. The air carried the briny bite of the nearby bay mixed with the resin of pine trees, a scent that once meant home. But I wasn't that girl anymore. At 28 I was a veteran, carrying scars I didn't wear on my uniform, a duffel bag that held my entire life, and the weight of a child growing inside me. The driver eyed me as I stepped off, his gaze flicking to my stomach though the bulky jacket mostly concealed it. "You sure this is your stop, ma'am?" he asked, doubt in his tone. I tightened my grip on the strap of my bag and forced a nod. "Yes. This is it." The door hissed shut behind me, leaving me alone on the gravel shoulder with the wind cutting through every layer of fabric. I stared at the quiet street ahead, the last place I wanted to crawl back to and yet the only place I had left. This wasn't how my life was supposed to unfold. I was supposed to make rank, finish my officer training, maybe command a unit overseas. Later I'd build a family the right way, with a partner who stood beside me through fire and storms. But that illusion shattered 3 months ago in a rain-slicked parking lot, when Darren looked me dead in the eye and muttered, "I can't do this, Laura. I'm not ready for you. Or for this." He'd slid a check across the table, money I left untouched. I walked out that night drenched to the bone, feeling smaller than I ever had even under mortar fire. With my savings drained and no roof left to claim, I had only one name to turn to, my mother, Evelyn. We hadn't spoken in years, our last words sharp enough to cut steel. But pride doesn't keep you warm when you're broke, pregnant, and 2 weeks from sleeping in bus stations. Her house looked the same, white paint peeling at the corners, porch swing motionless in the wind. I climbed the steps and knocked. Nothing. Knocked again. At last, the door cracked open, revealing the familiar hard lines of her face. She didn't soften, not even for a second. Her eyes dropped to my stomach like a gavel. "So it's true," she said flatly. "The soldier comes home in disgrace." I opened my mouth to plead, but she cut me off, her tone crisp as if recited from a script. "You can't stay here, Laura. I've built a life, a reputation. I won't have the neighbors whispering about an unwed daughter dragging her mistakes back to my doorstep." "I'm your family," I whispered. "No," she replied, her voice like ice. "You've always been a burden. I warned you before you ran off chasing glory in uniform. This world chews girls like you up and spits them out." And with that she closed the door. I stood there, fists trembling, the wind biting my skin until I couldn't tell whether I was shivering from cold or rage. I didn't cry. I wouldn't. Instead, I walked down those steps, past the flower beds she once trimmed with military precision, past the gravel path lined with her precious lawn ornaments. I walked until my legs ached and my body screamed for rest. By the time the glow of a small weather-beaten house appeared through the trees, a light shining from its windows like a beacon, I was half delirious from exhaustion, but I pushed through the gate anyway. I didn't even bother knocking. My knuckles hovered over the gate before I just called out, my voice shaking, "Hello? I'm sorry, does anyone have water? I can pay, please." A voice answered from the porch, steady but not unkind. "Water doesn't cost a thing in this house." The door opened and a woman stepped out. Her hair, silver and neatly pinned, glimmered in the lamplight. She wore a thick robe and slippers, but her bearing was unmistakable, straight-backed, sharp-eyed, the kind of presence that once issued commands and expected them obeyed. Her gaze swept over me, lingering on my face, then on my stomach, and that's when I realized tears had already begun spilling down my cheeks. "You're not from around here," she said. "Actually, I am," I whispered, my throat raw. "Laura Kane. I grew up on Rose Street. Evelyn Kane is my mother." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Evelyn, of course." She unlatched the gate and nodded toward the glow behind her. "Come in. You look ready to drop." "I don't want to intrude." "Oh, honey," she almost laughed, "you already are. But lucky for you, I don't mind." That night, I slept beneath a stranger's roof, in a room that smelled faintly of apples and old paper. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight alone. Her name was Hazel Whitmore. Later, I'd learned she had once taught high school science, the kind of teacher who terrified kids into memorizing formulas forever. Her little house overlooked the bay, surrounded by twisted apple trees that still carried autumn's scent. Inside it smelled of cinnamon, dried tea leaves, and a lingering echo of years gone by. The next morning Hazel poured me a cup of strong black coffee, no sugar, no cream. She slid it across the table and said, "If you're going to stay here, you'll earn your keep. I'm too old to shovel snow or chase off the raccoons. Think you can manage that with a baby on the way?" "I can manage," I told her. And I meant it. By the end of that week I'd taken the rickety town bus into the district office and applied for a teaching job. The clerk barely looked up at me, just muttered, "You're the Kane girl, aren't you?" as though it were an accusation. I nodded, introduced myself properly, and explained I had my degree in English literature. She clicked her nails against a stack of files, then slid one out. "Ironwood Middle needs a substitute for 8th grade literature. Temporary. Starts Monday. You want it?" I said yes before she even finished. That Monday morning I stood in front of 24 13-year-olds, my thrift store cardigan buttoned to the chin, my name scrawled on the board in block letters. Ms. Kane. A boy raised his hand, smirking. "Are you pregnant?" The class went dead silent. I took half a breath, met his eyes, and said simply, "Yes." "Now open your books. We're starting of Mice and Men." That first week was brutal. Side chatter, gum under desks, bold sarcasm. By Friday I came home drained, sore, and doubting every choice I'd made. But Hazel was always waiting, a bowl of stew or an apple tart set on the table as if she'd known exactly what I needed. She never pried, never asked about the father, never treated me like a lost cause. Instead she gave me chores. Refill the bird feeder. Prune the greenhouse. Idle hands make restless minds, Laura. And you've had enough of that. One night I found her sitting by the fire, holding a faded photograph of a young man in uniform. "Hi son," she said before I could ask. "Killed overseas." He was 22. I didn't speak. I just sat beside her, letting the silence honor him. The next morning she dropped a spare set of keys into my hand. "In case you come home late. Not that I'll wait up." And for the first time in months, as I graded essays by lamplight or folded baby clothes I'd found secondhand, I felt something new. Not joy, not yet. But calm. Until one afternoon, walking past the teacher's lounge, I heard my name, followed by a sneer. "That new girl, Kane. Already knocked up." I walked right past their whispers in the lounge, out into the bite of the night air. The cold stung my cheeks, the streets smelled of salt and pine, and yet, for the first time in years, I didn't feel lost. Hazel's porch light glowed steady through the storm, smoke from her chimney curling like a beacon. When I stepped inside, she didn't ask about the rumors or the stares. She just called from the kitchen, "You hungry?" I was. But more than that, I was home. The storm came 2 nights later. Not a soft flurry, but a nor'easter that clawed at the windows and bent trees until they groaned. The news had warned us, but all I cared about was making it through the next few days before my due date. Hazel fussed over me that evening, ladling out a double portion of shepherd's pie. "Eat, soldier," she teased. "You're feeding too, and one of them already looks like he's wearing body armor." I laughed harder than I'd laughed in months, almost believing things might actually be calm. But at 2:12 a.m., calm vanished. The first contraction ripped through me like shrapnel. My hand gripped the edge of the mattress, the other clutching my belly as if I could hold the baby in by willpower alone. I stood, knees buckling, whispering to no one, "Not now. Please, not now." My water broke and I stumbled barefoot into the hallway, pounding on Hazel's door. She was there instantly, hair loose, eyes sharp with the kind of focus that only comes from people who've seen crisis before. One glance and she muttered, "Hell. We need the hospital," I gasped. "I know," she snapped, already grabbing her coat. "Juice. Get your boots on. Move." The power was gone, lines dead, phones useless. Hazel sprinted through the gale to her neighbors. Minutes later, headlights cut through the storm. Pops Peterson, grizzled, cranky, half-retired cab driver, rolled up in his battered blue pickup. "Get in, kid," he yelled over the wind. "I've driven 5 women to deliver babies in this truck. You'll be number 6 if we don't end up in a ditch." I couldn't answer. Each contraction came like a grenade, exploding in my spine. Hazel climbed in beside me, clamping my hand tight. Her voice, low and steady, was the only thing keeping me tethered to earth. The drive blurred into snow, headlights, and Pop's cursing. I screamed, I swore, I begged, and Hazel just squeezed my hand and told me, breathe, soldier. Let it out. By the time we skidded into the ER bay, I was half delirious. Nurses rushed me inside, the hallway bright and sterile, smelling of antiseptic. 6 hours later it was over. The pain, the fear, the storm outside. And then there he was. A cry so raw and fierce it cut through me like a battle trumpet. They placed him against my chest, warm and impossibly small. His tiny fists clenched as if ready to fight the world. I whispered through tears I hadn't let fall until that moment. Hi baby. I'm your mama. And for the first time in years I didn't feel abandoned. I felt strong. I felt whole. Not when they first laid Jack on my chest, not when the nurses stitched me up or cleaned the blood from my skin. The moment it hit me, the weight of it all, was when they wheeled him away for checks and I was left alone in that sterile silence. The recovery room hummed with machines, but it was too quiet, too empty. That's when the tears came, sharp and unstoppable. I had done it. Not the way I'd planned, not the way people said it should be done. But my way. And then through the paper-thin wall I heard her. Not a newborn but a woman, sobbing, raw and broken. It wasn't grief I recognized. It was abandonment. And I had no idea yet how tightly her story would tangle with mine. By sunrise they brought Jack back to me, swaddled in a striped blanket, face flushed pink against the cold morning light. He latched easily, stubborn as a soldier, hungry like he already had something to prove. You've got lungs like a fighter, I whispered, brushing my knuckle across his cheek. You're going to be just fine. But even as I breathed him in, the sound of that woman crying next door clung to me like smoke. Later a nurse came in, the same one who'd caught Jack when he came barreling into this world. Her name tag read Lisa Arn. Mid-40s, bun unraveling, lines under her eyes from a night longer than most. She smiled at Jack, then lowered her voice like she was sharing classified intel. You doing okay? I nodded. We're good. She hesitated, then sighed. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but the baby next door, she's not doing well. Mother walked out. Left a note, never looked back. Dad's been there all night, hasn't said a word. My chest tightened. The baby's alone? Lisa nodded grimly. She was early. Fragile. Lungs aren't strong. Won't take formula. We've tried everything. It's not looking good. She sat on the edge of my bed like the weight of it had finally cracked her. They named her Ava. I looked down at Jack. His little fist had curled into the fabric of my gown, anchoring himself to me even in sleep. Can I see her? I whispered. Lisa blinked. Ava. Yes. Please. I just want to see her. She didn't answer right away. Then she stood. I'll ask. An hour later they wheeled me into the NICU. Machines beeped in a steady, uncertain rhythm, air thick with disinfectant and hope stretched thin. In the middle, inside a plastic bassinet, was a bundle so small she barely seemed real. Ava. She looked like paper folded too many times, skin nearly translucent, chest rising shallow, lips too pale. She didn't cry. She didn't fight. She won't eat, Lisa whispered beside me. She won't take the bottle. We've tried everything. I didn't wait for permission. I opened my arms. They placed her against me and I held my breath. The first, nothing. Then the faintest turn of her head. Her mouth parted, brushed against me and latched. Lisa gasped. Oh my God, she's eating. My throat burned with tears I couldn't swallow. I didn't speak, didn't move. Just held her, this tiny, unwanted life clinging to me like I was the last line between her and the dark. For the next hour I fed them both, Jack first, then Ava. 2 heartbeats pressed against me. 2 fragile weights that felt heavier than any rucksack I'd carried in uniform. Then the door creaked open. A man stepped in, tall, early 30s, boots caked with snow, an officer's jacket slung carelessly open. His eyes locked on the child in my arms. His child. You're feeding her? His voice cracked from exhaustion. Yes, I said simply. He moved closer, gripping the edge of her bassinet like he needed it to stand. I'm Daniel. Ava's father. I'm Sarah, I replied, Jack's mom. His jaw worked, his shoulders sagging. I didn't know what to do. He just left. I thought I'd lose her too. You won't, I told him, steady as a promise. Not if we keep her warm. Keep her fed. Keep her loved. And for the first time since he walked in, he looked like a man who believed me. My arms ached from cradling Jack, every movement tugging against stitches that refused to let me forget what my body had endured. But none of it mattered because in the quiet spaces of my mind, Ava lived there too, her fragile lips searching, her tiny weight pressed against me like she belonged as much as Jack did. The landline rang the next evening, startling Hazel and me in the kitchen. She lifted it with a raised brow. "Deep voice," she mouthed before passing it over. "Hello. It's Daniel. From the hospital." My heart thudded once, heavy. "How's Ava?" "She's better. They're keeping her another week, but the nurses said she's eating now. Gaining weight." He paused. "I think it's because of you." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, charged with something I didn't yet have a name for. "I know it's a lot to ask," he continued, his voice rough, "but would you come back? Just for feedings until she's stronger? Formula still isn't working." There was no hesitation in me. "Yes." For the next 7 days, Hazel kept Jack while I made the drive back to the NICU every morning and every evening. The nurses began calling me Mama too, and I pretended I didn't love it. Daniel was always there, awkward at first, hovering like a man afraid of breaking the air itself. But each time I placed Ava in his arms, his hands grew steadier. One morning, I returned to find Hazel in the garden, Jack strapped to her chest in a sling she'd tied from an old curtain. "You're turning me into a grandmother," she muttered, tugging at weeds. "And I haven't even yelled at you properly yet." But her lips brushed Jack's hair when she thought no one was watching. At the end of that week, Ava was cleared to come home. Daniel stood on Hazel's porch, snow tangled in his hair, Ava bundled tight in his arms. His voice was raw. "I need help. I've got a service house at the edge of town. Just me. Nights are long. She sleeps best after you feed her." His eyes met mine, stripped bare. "I can pay you. You and Jack would have your own room. I'm not asking for anything more than help." "You don't need to pay me," I said. "Yes, I do," he insisted, voice hardening. "Because I don't want to owe you kindness." That part I understood. Hazel helped me pack. "You're not running off," she warned. "You're helping someone breathe. Just don't forget to breathe yourself." Daniel's house was smaller than Hazel's, perched on a hill overlooking the bay. The cedar walls smelled faintly of smoke and salt. The windows fogged when the kettle boiled, and everything about it felt unfinished but steady. He gave Jack and me the biggest room. Ava's crib stayed in his. We didn't talk much those first days. He worked long shifts, I stayed with the babies. We moved like ghosts through the house, only colliding when necessity demanded it. But some nights, after feedings and lullabies faded into silence, I'd find him on the porch, arms folded, eyes locked on the horizon. "You don't have to sit out here alone," I said once. "I do," he answered, but softer. "But thank you." That was the thing about Daniel, he didn't waste words. But when he spoke, you felt everyone. The weeks unfolded like a dream of snow and breath. Mornings filled with oatmeal and bottles. Afternoons scented with cedar and wool blankets drying by the fire. I memorized Ava's every sound, the tiny catch in her breath, the twitch of her toes, the way Jack's laughter and sleep seemed to echo through both of them. Daniel was always moving, shoveling snow, chopping wood, fixing the steps on the porch. The only time he sat still was when Ava slept on his chest, her tiny hand fisted in his shirt. I would watch quietly from the doorway, both of them drifting between exhaustion and peace. We never spoke of the past. His wife who left. The man who broke me. The silence we shared wasn't distance anymore. It was shelter. Until one stormy night when the heater broke. The wind screamed against the shutters and we huddled in the living room, both babies tucked between us, wrapped in layers of blankets. Daniel handed me a chipped mug of instant cocoa, his fingers brushing mine too long to be accidental. "I used to think I knew what strong meant," he said, voice low. "Muscles, orders, rescues on the water." He spoke like a man confessing to the dark while the storm rattled the shutters. I studied him through the candlelight, his face carved sharp by shadows. But when Vanessa left, his voice dipped, almost breaking, and I was holding this fragile little girl with tubes in her chest and no mother to fight for her. That's when I learned. Strong isn't pulling people from drowning. It's staying put when you're drowning yourself. He turned his gaze on me, really turned it, like he hadn't dared until now. "That's what you did, Sarah. Stayed when you didn't have to." I swallowed hard, the lump burning in my throat. Maybe I didn't have anywhere else to go. He shook his head. You could have gone back to Boston. Found your old life. A clean slate. Someone else. Someone else wouldn't understand, I said softly. The air between us thickened, warm as fog, impossible to hold but impossible to ignore. That night we made our beds on the living room floor. Two adults wrapped around the quiet gravity of two children, breathing side by side without speaking, trying not to let the cracks inside us show. Spring crept into Willow Bay reluctantly. Brown grass pressed through melting snow. Crocuses fought their way into the cold air like soldiers refusing to retreat. Daniel returned to full-time duty with the Coast Guard, long days on the water, while I picked up part-time work in the town library, cataloging books, reading stories to toddlers every Tuesday morning. Hazel still visited every week, scolding me for skipping meals, her affection always hiding under a layer of sharpness. You look like a candle about to burn out, she muttered, piling potatoes on my plate. In April, Ava smiled for the first time, a crooked grin that seemed to ask the world if it was safe to trust. In May, Jack crawled for the first time, determined to climb into Ava's crib. She yanked his hair in greeting. Neither of them cried. One Sunday we walked along the bay, salt clinging to the air. Daniel pushed Ava's stroller while I carried Jack pressed to my chest. The tide was low, gulls shrieking overhead. I don't know what this is, Daniel said, staring at the water. But I don't want to lose it. I didn't answer. Just slid my fingers into his. He didn't let go. That night he kissed me in the kitchen. No grand gesture, no fireworks. Just two tired people and a hum of the dishwasher, finally brave enough to admit what had already taken root. And that was when I realized something terrifying. I was happy. Not the forced kind. Not numb or distracted. Just happy. Which is always when life decides to test you. It arrived in a plain white envelope. No return address. Just my name, Sarah Whitman, written in a sharp, black scrawl I hadn't seen in months but knew instantly. Daniel handed it to me over breakfast, his hand steady, his eyes unreadable. This was in the mailbox. Looks personal. I didn't open it right away. I finished the pancakes. Cleaned Jack's sticky hands. Folded laundry. But the envelope burned on the counter like it was staring at me. During nap time I finally sat on the porch and tore it open. Sarah, it began. I heard you're back in Willow Bay. I don't know if you'll read this, but I have to say something. I made a mistake. A big one. I was scared, I was selfish, and I know I hurt you. But I can't stop thinking about you or the baby. Is he mine? I won't talk. Please. I've changed. I want to meet my son if he is my son. I deserve that much, don't I? Liam. The name alone was enough to rip the air from my lungs. Liam, the man who walked out the moment I whispered pregnant. Who blocked my number. Who vanished like I was a ghost. And now, months later, he wanted to meet his son. I walked back inside. Daniel was on the couch, Ava asleep on his shoulder, his eyes fixed on me like he already knew. Bad news, he asked quietly. I handed him the letter. He read it without a word, his jaw tight, his thumb brushing Ava's back absently. Then after a long silence he asked, Are you going to respond? I don't know, I whispered. Do I even owe him that? Daniel didn't answer right away. He just looked at Ava, then at Jack in the bassinet, then at me. Finally he said, Whatever you decide, just promise me one thing. Don't let guilt make the choice. That night the letter stayed under my pillow like a curse. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Liam's shadow was about to unravel everything I'd built from nothing. What if Liam came back here? What if he demanded rights, dragged me through court, used the law like a rifle pointed at my chest? What if he was right and my son deserved to know his blood father? Would Jack hate me one day for keeping that truth buried? I sat in the rocking chair by the window, watching him breathe in his sleep, steady little chest rising and falling, his fists clenched like a fighter who didn't even know he'd already survived a war. I had no answers, only questions that chewed at my nerves. 1 week passed. Then I didn't reply to Liam's letter. And then one morning Hazel showed up on the porch with a lemon pie in one hand and an envelope in the other. Her face gave nothing away. You got another letter, she said evenly. But this one isn't from Boston. My pulse jumped. I tore it open. Claire, it began, I know we haven't spoken since you came back. I said things I regret, things I can't take back. But I've heard about what you're doing. The town is too. About the babies. And I'm sorry. You're not the failure I told you you'd be. You're braver than I ever was. If you ever want to talk, my door is open. It was from my mother. The same woman who slammed her door on me the day I confessed I was pregnant. The woman who made me believe I had wrecked my own life before it even started. And now this. I handed the letter to Daniel. He read it slowly, folded it with care and set it down beside Liam's. Looks like the world's trying to crawl back in, he murmured. Guess it finally realized what it lost. I stared at him, at Ava swaddled in her blanket, at Jack babbling in the grass outside, at the house that had somehow become a fortress of our own making. I wasn't the same woman who showed up on Hazel's porch during that storm. And maybe, I didn't know the past a damn thing anymore. Later, I stood alone at the edge of Willow Bay watching the tide draw back from the rocks. The wind whipped my coat and filled my lungs with salt and seaweed. Behind me, the town was yawning awake. Inside me, something heavier had lifted. 2 letters. 2 ghosts. Liam's, full of guilt and demands, rewriting history into something it never was. And my mother's, softer but soaked in regret. Both of them were reaching for a version of me that no longer existed. So I wrote 2 letters of my own. To my mother, I appreciate your words, truly. But forgiveness isn't a door you step through once. It's a crawl through a long, dark hall. And I'm still on my knees. I'll let you know when I'm ready. To Liam, Jack already has a father. One who stayed. I never mailed either one. I didn't need to. The moment I sealed those envelopes, the decision rooted in me like fire thawing a winter that had lasted too long. That weekend, Daniel surprised me with a picnic up on the cliffs behind the house. The sky was denim blue, the air sweet with lilacs. We sat on a blanket, Ava gurgling between us, Jack trying to eat a pine cone, and for the first time in months I felt free. You okay? Daniel asked, his eyes locked on me with that steady focus that made lying impossible. Yeah, I said. I think I am. You seem lighter. I am. He leaned back on his elbows, studying the horizon. You ever think about leaving? Not just the town, the whole thing. I thought about it. The Claire from a year ago would have already packed her bag and run. But now. Not anymore, I said. This is where Jack took his first steps. Where Ava found her laugh. Where I remembered how to breathe. Daniel smiled, reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black box. My heart stopped. I'm not asking today, he said quickly. I know you're not ready. But someday maybe. I opened it. Inside wasn't a ring. And that was enough. No return address, no apology that could erase the past. Just my name written in my own hand, reminding me that I had rebuilt myself piece by piece. I thought back to the first time I stood on that porch. Pregnant, drenched from the rain, trembling so hard I could barely knock. The shutters sagged, the steps groaned, and I told myself it was only temporary, a place to hide until I figured out how to keep breathing. But a year later, that porch carried different sounds. Jack's bubbling laugh. Ava's soft coos. The low clink of Daniel setting his mug beside mine on brisk mornings. That house wasn't a shelter anymore. It was a witness. It saw me. I wasn't running. I was rooted. Spring rolled in early. The orchard behind us burst into white petals, the air thick with sweetness. Daniel let Jack help with the garden, though most of his help meant throwing clumps of dirt at his boots while shrieking with joy. Ava had begun her slow crawl across the floor, stubborn as a soldier on a mission, tugging herself toward anything she wasn't supposed to touch. Me. I had started writing again. Real writing. Not angry letters to people who didn't deserve my words, not lists scrawled on grocery paper. Stories. The kind that made sense of what once felt senseless. I claimed the spare room as my office, set up the old laptop, and began threading my scars into sentences. One afternoon, just as I'd finished revising a chapter about my mother's silences, the bell rang. She was there, Eleanor. A plain coat, a fistful of wildflowers clutched like contraband. For a long beat we stood across the gravel, 2 women who had shared too much hurt. I opened the gate. She didn't step through. I won't stay, she said, voice shaking like the flowers in her hands. I only wanted to thank you, for the letter. For not hating me. I did hate you, I admitted quietly. For a long time. But hate is heavy. I can't keep carrying it. She nodded, her eyes wet. I'm proud of you, Sarah. And then she turned and walked away. No dramatic embrace, no sobbing. Just truth, raw and unpolished. And for me that was enough. 2 weeks later, a message from Liam lit my phone. Not a letter, not regret, just a photo. Him with a new woman standing beside a stroller. "This is Mia. Thought you should know Jack has a sister. If you ever want them to meet." I stared at it until my hands went cold, then pressed delete. Jack didn't need chaos disguised as connection. He needed constancy, safety, love. The things he already had. That night I told Daniel everything. The message. The photo. My choice. He didn't demand details, didn't press. He only kissed my temple and said, "You did the right thing." And I believed him. By late summer our house had shed its old skin. Fresh paint on the porch. Shutters straightened. String lights draped along the fence that glowed like small stars against the bay. The kitchen was alive with herbs from the garden, the laughter of friends, Logan and Sierra, always bringing pies and teasing Daniel about his poor aim at getting Jack to eat greens. And then one September morning, barefoot in the driveway, Ava on my hip, Jack tugging my sleeve, I opened the mailbox and froze. A thick envelope. A publishing press in Portland wanted to buy my manuscript. The story of a woman who lost everything and found something better. I cried right there with gravel under my feet and sunlight burning my eyes. Days later, I signed the contract at the same kitchen table where I once folded in on myself and sobbed. We celebrated with strawberry shortcake, paper plates, and champagne cheap enough to fizz more than it bubbled. Jack dumped cream in Daniel's lap. Ava smeared frosting in her curls. I laughed so hard it hurt. That night, when the sky above the bay glimmered with stars and the breeze smelled like lilacs and salt, Daniel wrapped me from behind. "You happy?" he asked, his breath warm against my ear. Happy felt too small. Too thin. I pressed my forehead to his and whispered, "I'm whole." We stood there, children sleeping inside, the night folding around us like a blessing. Not because life had turned flawless, but because I had finally become unbreakable.